Break Effect is a stat that gives the player a combat advantage upon breaking the toughness of the enemy. It is a stat that interferes with the build path of most characters that would like to utilize the stat in Honkai Star Rail. Nowadays, there is many characters that directly scale with Break Effect, which definitely wasn't the norm before this point in time. Break Effect was a stat that if you built onto your characters at some point, you were quite literally trolling. During Honkai Star Rail's closed beta testing, Break Effect would be the substat that scaled exponentially well on characters that had a ton of toughness break. The character that comes to mind would be Su Sheng. She had a multiple attack string if played correctly, would allow the player to break the toughness of elite enemies of the physical element. If played with Silverwolf, this quick deletion of the enemy's toughness was even more potent. One thing to note is that all of this took place during the beta, which meant most players at the time were in the early to mid game. Breaking the toughness of the enemy did more damage than the damaging abilities of characters at the time. Putting Break Effect would amplify that massive damage. Considering physical and fire elemental characters dealt the most damage to the enemy after breaking their toughness, they would be a part of the reason as to why Break Effect was heavily gutted leading into the launch of the game, ultimately causing the death of these Break Effect abusers in the process. Break Effect leading into the launch of Honkai Star Rail will still be viable as the early game strat was still a decent cheese mechanic, but it ultimately fell short as your account scaled into the late game with hypercarries such as Seal and Jing. Break Effect wouldn't have much of a presence because formulating a crit-based build with a funnel to attack stats would yield way more damage. This meant that the previous Break Effect characters would swap to a crit-based build and benefit more from the build change. This also meant that Break Effect would find a spot in the meta for quite some time, until the release of Silverwolf that was. There is a few things you must understand before we move on. Break Effect not only increases the amount of damage you deal after breaking the toughness of enemies, but it also increased the power of the passives that come with breaking said toughness bar. It further delayed the action of the enemies more after breaking their toughness. The elements that would increase the strength of the dot that the enemy received was fire, wind, lightning, and physical. The ice, quantum, and imaginary elements would increase the strength of their immobilizing passive. Quantum also giving an increase of the damage the enemy received from the respective passive. This quantum damage increasing bomb would meet its maker with the release of Silverwolf in 1.1. I feel as if we mentioned Silverwolf in every single video at this point. I mean, after all, she was a meta-defining character, so it only makes sense. Silverwolf could benefit from a full Break Effect build because of 3 reasons. The first reason being that Silverwolf could place quantum weakness onto the enemy, guaranteeing not only the quantum weakness, but also toughness bar damage. The second reason being that the quantum bomb placed onto the enemies after breaking their toughness would have an increase in damage and be very easy to stack to 5 because of the delay of the enemy's action value. The third reason was because of how easy the build path was to achieve versus that of a sub DPS crit based build. The crit based build took too many stats to build and required having virtually 0 wasted stats. The Break Effect based build only required 2 stats, Break Effect and Effect hit rate. Considering Silverwolf was a meta-defining character, so would this way of building the character be. The reason for Break Effect's existence would matter more because any character that utilized damage over time, or DOT for short, as their main source of damage, would benefit from breaking the toughness of the enemy. Kafka, who made the damage over time playstyle even stronger, would benefit from the dot placed into the enemy from their toughness being broken. She could detonate that strong dot on the enemy, dealing a ton of damage in the process. This Break Effect Kafka build was centered around enemies that were lightning weak, so it wasn't viable all the time. Considering the unpredictability of the amount of lightning weak enemies in the endgame, many players would disregard this way of building Kafka altogether and just go the traditional full attack stat line. The potential of this did signal that at some point having Break Effect from an external source would be very valuable for increasing the overall team damage for the dot playstyle. So at this point, Break Effect was just very niche. Niche in a game such as Honkai Star Rail isn't good by any means because the average player is just gonna use the best option presented to them. Now obviously there is a different way to look at this, niche in a sense of a playstyle and not necessarily niche because of a character being glued to one specific team. The only way to make Break Effect better would be to design characters that depended on the stat itself, not necessarily a character that could benefit from the stat, but would instead. In hindsight, it makes sense as to why the whole stat wasn't to be nerfed leading into the launch of the game, because with the upcoming characters, Break Effect would most certainly become meta-defining. Ruan Mei was the first character to directly scale Break Effect. Having more Break Effect on Ruan Mei would boost the damage of your team further, and give nice added personal damage whenever the toughness of the enemy was broken. Ruan Mei also gave 20% Break Effect to the team, in which, in combination of the added toughness bar breaking efficiency she gave, would make those characters that could benefit from Break Effect a lot less gimmicky. So ultimately, Break Effect Kafka was back onto the menu, but the best part was that these stats and buffs were provided externally, which didn't directly interfere with Kafka's base build. Zui was the first true damage dealer that directly scaled with Break Effect, increasing her damage dealt depending on the amount she had. It also meant supports of the Break Effect playstyle like Ruan Mei became a mainstay. So not only did Zui, but future Break characters borderline needed Ruan Mei to be competitive in the current endgame meta. So even at this point, Break Effect was still niche, even more niche than previously following the release of broken powerhouses that gave a damage ceiling rise to the pre-existing hypercarry meta. So one of two things needed to happen. Break Effect needed to have more ways of being provided to the team externally, or a damage dealer of the 5-star category that directly scaled with Break Effect needed to be released to fuel the playstyle. So actually both of those ended up coming to fruition. There was a Break Effect set made for Ruan Mei and other Harmony characters like Asta that gave even more Break Effect to the team upon utilization of the ultimate on an ally. Boot Hill will be the first 5-star damage dealer to release that scaled with the Break Effect stat. Considering how his build path works, characters that increase his crit stats aren't as beneficial as those that give damage boosts like Ruan Mei and Bronya, because much like discussed early in the video, it's very hard to build crit stats on a Break Effect character. Focusing down one stat and being viable would be the specialty of Boot Hill, and I imagine future break-oriented damage dealers. It's also important to note that Boot Hill is of the physical element, which means that his break damage is leagues above that than any other element in the game. Now I did skip the release of Gallagher, whom is a character that scales directly with Break Effect, but he's a defensive option. Sure, he has decent damage to provide to the overall team damage, but he didn't fuel the playstyle more than a dedicated damage dealer or Harmony character like Ruan Mei. However, like Ruan Mei, there would be another Harmony character that gave the Break Effect playstyle a new spin. In the future prospects of a meta-defining team comp, the Harmony Trailblazer is a Break Effect restricted buffer, which isn't bad by any means, but rather just very niche. What the Harmony Trailblazer excels at is allowing weaknesses broken enemies take additional damage, which is referred to as super break. This super break damage can scale exponentially high, depending on the damage dealer, but will scale even higher following the release of a fire destruction character. While Boot Hill isn't dependent on the Harmony Trailblazer, it by no means diminishes the value of the Break Effect buffer. It just means we have yet to receive a dedicated damage dealer for the new and improved playstyle, but that's to change very, very soon. So there you have it. Weakness break, much like the other playstyles in Star Rail, hasn't had much of a chance to shine until premium options had released into the game. Considering Break Effect was one that started off extremely strong and fell off the hardest, I'm sure it was a surprise to all of us seeing the resurgence of this playstyle. And no, I'm not talking seal puns. I'm honestly very excited to see what the future holds with the Harmony Trailblazer and the release of Firefly/Sam. Thank you for watching and have a nice rest of your day.